What's up, everybody? Today on the Yours Truly podcast, I have Vlad Kolbaia in the virtual studio. Vlad is a software engineer, husband, and father. His Twitter bio reads Engineer exploring the intersection of technology, liberal arts, web design, human computer interactions, and spatial computing. He is also part of a Twitter collective called Logoi Dev, a development and design collective. Its bio stating, we want to bridge the gap between liberal arts, ethics, and the most advanced technology. Vlad reached out to me and expressed he had been enjoying the Yours Truly podcast and was available to practice some conversation craft if I was up for it. He told me his interests include Slavic culture, Christianity, Ukraine, Russia, Georgia, the US, and Canada, virtual reality, augmented reality, software engineering, digital design, and everything in between or specific. I said, awesome, let's get something on the calendar. I then noticed that he slipped into a HiveMind chat on a PVK premiere here on the YouTube a few days ago. He not so subtly mentioned that he worked for StreamYard. This was of great interest in the HiveMind and to me as well, as StreamYard has become the go-to resource for many participating in this little corner of the internet's conversations, specifically those around Paul Vanderklay. StreamYard, with its explicit branding options, has been a fun addition to the sandbox toys we play with here on YouTube. Because of all these convergences, I am looking forward to this conversation and where it will lead. So without further delay, I give you Vlad Kolbaia. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud. And here we
Hi.
are.
Hi,
Hey,
Christian.
Vlad.
Hi. Well, I'm amazed by your production quality, and yeah, I respect that. It seems like you would take good. I wouldn't call pride, but dedicated to this, and I like it. Beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a reality to, I guess, care. It can be called a lot of other things, and it can be attached to a lot of other parts of our ego. But handling these conversations with care and respect, it's important to me, and to value people's time, and it's also about play. These are the tools that I have learned to play with over the years, and so it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and again, technology is there to help us do this. Hopefully, we get to talk a bit more about how that's achieved.
Yes.
To me, it is truly miraculous. So we'll see how it goes.
I agree. So yeah, before we kind of get directly into that, I'm curious from your perspective, how did we get to this conversation?
Well, I haven't met you. I don't believe we met during the summit. Have you
So you
been
were
to?
you were at Symbolic World? Okay.
Yes, but I've been around. Uh, you mentioned on one of the previous shows that you went to dinner with Justin and Nate. So I've been to that dinner, but probably on the other times that.
The opposite ones, yeah.
Yes. I enjoyed my time there. I also jumped on a group podcast with Nate recently,
I saw that.
so I'm enjoying. I don't know if I'm particularly helpful or able to handle this attention, let's say, but it's definitely good to practice speech. English is not my native language, so and I also feel like there's things that I'm able to provide some interesting, I wouldn't call unique, but interesting perspective, because a lot of the cultural zeitgeist now, it does follow around, Ukraine, Russia, mythology, fairy tales, Christianity, and technology, AI,
Yes.
all those things.
Yes.
And I'm kind of in between most of them. So hopefully it's going to be interesting to you. at least to you, right? That's the
Yeah.
most important part. And then hopefully your audience. And I appreciate so far everything you've been doing. So
Yeah. Well, yeah. So if you were at the summit, then that's obviously, the Peugeotian, Peterson, you know, downstream.
yeah.
Um, I think, are you Orthodox as
I
well?
am, I
Yeah.
am, but it's interesting. So I found orthodoxy already in Canada. I think escaping war was
Mm.
like this catalytic event somehow that made me realize that, oh, it's not very, like I've been reflecting on this, and recently there's been a 2-year anniversary since the start of the war. So I remember on the 23rd of February, 2022, I went to sleep. It was a normal day. Yeah, there were talks online, but I went to the office. We joked around with guys. Maybe that those jokes were already kind of denial, or what's left, right? What's left to do? But honestly, there was no. It was truly a surprising moment to wake up to. And then my life was quite. I wouldn't call perfect, but as close as that could be. We had good job, everything I kind of wanted at that age, especially family, apartment. I remember walking around our park near my apartment. It's been recently renovated. A lot of shops and bakeries opened up, and I was thinking, hey, that's fantastic. What could be better? I work for a U.S. software company remotely, and that allowed us to sustain a very, very good, you know, not middle class, but much even higher way of life. So I thought, yeah, I've got life figured out, right? What's left? What's left?
Mm.
And then it's like, oh, it felt like it was a conversation, not a direct one, but oh, you do think got it figured out. I have something else for you in mind. And when you wake up, like I went to sleep physically in the same space, right? Same bed, same apartment, same GPS coordinates. But then you wake up and all of those factors are the same, but you're in a very, very different place. And that was I think it was, I now think of it using theological language as a whale being lifted, right? Um, so there's at least an orthodoxy concept of the veil of the Theotokos, which is kind of holds the world together. And then something got broken, right? And it was the symptoms of that failure, of that production crash, let's say, if we're speaking about in terms of code. The symptoms were we didn't have electricity, we didn't have the banking system went down, our whole traffic system was overloaded. Everything that could go wrong, it felt like that happened. We woke up, there was no water to my son was on the other side of the front line, literally. So that feeling, it indicated that something very down the or up, I don't know which way to go, but somewhere on a different layer of this hierarchy got broken.
Yes.
So, and I think theological language helped me understand that it was truly, it's like a symptom of this a bug, let's say. And I got to live through it. And there was this force that allowed me and my family to kind of alleviate those, or get to safety, or get around it. And many others that I know that didn't have this opportunity. So I guess that's the moment I kind of started to look all those things that Jonathan speaks about, like it became very real. Like, oh,
Hmm.
so that's what you mean when you say that there is an order to things that isn't truly visible.
Yeah.
And Because when it all functions, let's say right now, like we're able to speak, but then sound can disappear. And there are infinitely many reasons why that could happen, from a physical breakage of the microphone to, I don't know, some bytes or a server or some dude tripping over a wire in the data center, right?
Right.
So that's the moment when it felt real. And then there was this, as I went to sleep that night in like a basement of a hospital, moldy, overcrowded, um, I prayed. I probably prayed truly for the first time in my life about my son. His name is Michael.
Mm.
And I attribute us being saved. Like there was this presence, I think I felt, of some type of protective force that kind of bound it together. So like a upper veil was lifted, right? And many people did not survive or did not handle it well. But there were these little things like guardian angels, basically, that kind of were able to hold it. All of this chaos, it was like the second layer that was more personal, more easy to grasp. You know, because when society functions, when you have electricity, you have internet, but all of that works as a machine, then all the miraculousness of it disappears because you don't think that it's miraculous, right? But when it doesn't, that's when this question arises. If you flip a switch and it doesn't come on, oh, now you go into this mode. Is it wrong with the switch? Is it wrong up the electricity chain? So then when we came to Canada, I kind of felt drawn, and there was there was an amount of
And this is
church.
from Ukraine.
Yes, so we went to Poland first. We had to reunite the family because, again, my son was in Russian territory at the time. So we reunited, and then Poland, we got all the documents, and Canada. The reason why Canada is, it's been the easiest to get, ability to work permits, and I also attribute it to my, education and language and job, that we're able to kind of afford life here, and all of those things that these, it's like a puzzle piece that we were ripped apart there, but it somehow relatively fits here. We're not yet sure, right? It's still, not glued in, um, but we're trying to make it work. So yeah, and then orthodoxy. My wife actually helped me stop this soul searching and say, "Hey, why are you even trying? We are all baptized Orthodox." And then
Mm.
I looked into it more, and then when I finally visited Ukrainian Orthodox Church here in Waterloo, it felt home. Like instantly, this is the place to be.
Oh, that's
So
beautiful. The whole
yeah,
story. The whole story is. I mean, there's a lot there. How old was your son, and why were y'all in different spaces at the time?
so he was 2.
Mm.
Uh, and he visited. So we're from a smaller town closer to Russia. Um, it's not a village, but it's a small town, and that's where we were born. Both my wife and myself. Our most of our family from there. We went to same school, and um, that's kind of our safe, childhood haven. So my son was spending some time with the grandparents, and and usually that happened on Thursdays, right? Usually, my wife's father had a business, but he would travel to our town, which is Kharkiv, which was close, like a second biggest city in Ukraine. It's the largest city in the east. A lot of students, a lot of, it was beautiful. It was home, and we moved there for studies in university, but the rest of the family uh, stayed over. So and so why I mentioned that it's Thursday is this also a little bit of unexplainable detail. For some reason, uh, her father, my wife's father, came to Kharkiv early on Tuesday and said, "Hey, we're going to give you a bit more time to spend together,
Mm.
uh, to have fun, remember the young days when you didn't have kids." And
Yeah.
I appreciate that's been very helpful for mental state as a young parent. um, but then when the war started, he was there, and that town is very close to a important railway kind of junction. So Russians wanted to take that fast, and they did. The mayor of the town at the time said he didn't want bloodshed, so he kind of gave up the town. And as Ukrainian soldiers were retreating to protect this larger, more important city, they blew up some bridges.
Mm.
So we didn't have a way to get there. And while rest of our friends, everyone was moving west, uh, the only thing we could think about is how do we get there. Thankfully, we didn't have a car, right? Otherwise, we would have probably rushed. And there were reports of cars being, shot at, and so we had to rely on whoever was there. For a couple of first days, we were kind of in the neighborhood. There's another interesting story of hell, I would call, because my wife had been attacked in one of the basements with,
Oh man.
and I remember she was like in tears, bloody a bit, and that's one of the lowest points of my life, because I
Yes.
didn't know what to do.
Mm.
And it was very drastic, this moment of, oh, I'm king of the world, I have everything. And then 2 days after, you have zero, and you're in basement that isn't safe, and now you need to figure it out. So this was a huge,
Yeah.
descent into hell.
Yes.
But then we kind of it slowly got better and better, better and better. And we relied on this network of friends of my wife's father, and then it was kind of more collective, I think, because we dependent on transport, dependent on this kind of communal decision making. We had to leave the town, so we reunited, I believe, close to 2 months later. We reunited in,
Wow.
and a 2-year-old. Thankfully, he was our my wife's mother. She was always around, so she's been extremely helpful in helping us raise him. So he's been comfortable. But then again, after 2 months, seeing him and holding him, it was surreal.
Yes.
And then we kind of, me leaving Ukraine also is a different story, because it wasn't by law, you couldn't leave. So I had to be clever about it and find all the documents, all the legal uh, ways to exit, which I found later also miraculously.
Mm.
um, I was able to enroll into a foreign university, and by law, if you're a student of a foreign university, you're able to leave. So I got all the, medical exams, all the
Mm.
documents, and then another weird moment was, it felt like this truly exodus, of you. I sent my rest of the family out to Poland, and I said, "Hey, I'll figure it out. Leave." And I had no clue at the time. It wasn't on the table, this loophole. So, um, but at the end of the day, yeah, when you have that stamp, and on a Polish border, like when you
Mm.
have that stamp, and this like weight lifted, like, oh, I'm all of this hopeful, future that you kind of uh, think for yourself or your family, it becomes concrete now.
Man, there's so much going on there, because you're hitting on Well, for one, your story, and you're finding this resonance from this mythological reality of the Exodus and this biblical narrative, existing in a reality that didn't feel like it was necessary for a spiritual reality. And then all of a sudden that switch getting flipped very drastically. You talked about the trust of your relational network, which is something that's highly diminished, especially in the more Western cultures, even in the small town that I live in, compared to, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And yet that was what had to rise to the top for you to be able to find your son again. So there's a lot of beautiful things there. And yet here we are doing human computer interaction.
Yeah. Assisted.
And I know that's one of your kind of interests, human and computer interaction. Talked about, this is a type of virtual and augmented reality that we're practicing right now. And then you even work for StreamYard, which this was taking place on this platform that's facilitating that. I do want to kind of like get into that conversation. Like, how do you see where we're at in, even with contrast to when all that kind of disappeared for you for a little bit, like where we're at, how does that fit into the future, and your overall opinions on it?
I think it is the future because our reliance on tools is in a way good because it allows us to achieve way more than we could before, but it also is terribly bad because of the sheer complexity of these things, right? I will not be able to put even something, maybe keyboard I could, but even as something as simple as a switchboard, right? Very few people I know are able to solder something or figure out how to fix it if it breaks. And most of our infrastructure, most of our population are infinitely ignorant about how any of this works. I'm a bit more knowledgeable about, algorithms and how video transmission works, even though we rely on libraries and tools built by other more smarter people. So I'll try to put a pin in that because there's a lot of interesting parallels between hierarchies of order in technological, sphere and domain. But I wanted to mention something before about communal reliance and our experience with technologies. One day it didn't work, right? So everything that we thought of broke. So we had to rely on cash. If we didn't have cash, then we weren't able to buy food. On the flip side, if we did have the car, right, our life could have been much different, right? So our dependence on technology is it's like a dance, right? It's good and it's bad. So I view technology as having a place, but then if you give too much power to it and you don't realize that you've done so, you've put yourself in danger, because then someone who does has control over you, over your life, over your destiny. So, and I think people are recognizing it now because of AI and these algorithms and how they kind of feed off of you. But it doesn't seem like it is stoppable in any way. So during the summit, I was the person who asked a question about angelic AIs as a way to counteract, demonic AIs, and It seems to me that the only way to do this is, first, it needs to be voluntary. So it needs to be diametrically opposed to the practices that right now are being, down. So right now it's harvesting, right? Data harvesting. And so it's something over you taking dominion without consent, basically. Whereas the only way to do something that, even, symbolically speaking, is different, is to voluntarily give it up, right? To build it, to fund it ourselves. And I think the situation in Ukraine, which I've been in, I think the most of the world was surprised, is how quickly this emergent behavior appeared of, local cooperation, local, donations, is funding of very specific people and very specific needs. Like, oh, I'm not very good at, I don't want to give it to the government, right? But I know this person who needs a helmet, so I will give directly to him. And then there is a much clearer sense of cause and effect. Oh, I give directly to you, you get the benefit from it, you say thank you to me, and the loop is closed. Whereas a lot of things right now, and I, again, on the topic of Ukraine, is people in the West, arguably, and I think very, they have reasons to do so, are questioning, okay, so you're, without my permission, without my consent, you're taking my money in form of taxes, and now you're giving it to someone who I have no clue, right, that can end up in the pocket of some oligarch or some other person. So,
And it's not just that; it's also in the fractional reserve banking with debt. It's the same. It's the other side of that coin, so to
sure,
speak.
there's,
Because it's putting our trust in these, whether it's government or in banking, outside of relationship. And you can have certain contexts. You can have a relationship with a banker, but the way the whole system's built, that doesn't kind of matter.
yeah, it's again, complexity hides, right? It's the more complex this is, the more difficult it is to kind of trace and understand what's going on. And I think it's so by design. It's not like, for it to be graspable, it needs to be direct and voluntary. I think that's the only thing that can help. And maybe this, I may sound libertarian, but to me, this issue of taxation, I view church as a antidote to the way that churches are funded and organized, are kind of the very next logical step over how the family unit operates. Is usually in the family, you pull resources together to buy a fridge, buy a car, do something, go on vacation. Then the next step would be a church, right? You pull several fractional resources of families and you are able to fund something, and it's voluntary and it's transparent, right? um, and if it's, when it scales up infinitely to the form of government and becomes centralized, that's when it is questionable. Because again, if you build this pyramid up, then whoever is the beneficiary or has the power to direct those resources is tempted to not give it up, to ultimately God, right?
To continue the sacrifice.
Yeah. And I think that's what is corruption is, right? It's misuse of this power and trust by government agencies, by, servants. Uh, Interestingly, the political party in Ukraine right now are servants of the people. That's very symbolic as well, and intentional. So all of those things, I think, are connected, because again, the patterns that constitute reality on a deeper level, they seem to be the same, right? And one of the most fundamental patterns is something that Jonathan speaks to a lot, is multiplicity and unity, how many separate things become united. And that's a question you can address on all levels of life, right? From molecular biology and nuclear physics to how do societies organize themselves, how do chairness of a chair and so on. All of those things are built on the same law, same formula, same
Pattern.
pattern.
Yeah.
And I think I've experienced when that law is broken, like what it looks like when a more fundamental one is broken. I don't
And
necessarily know which one that was.
do you think that, civilization is where we're feeling the possibility of the things that we were thinking were certain and solid are the cracks within those structures beginning to show more and more, and that's part of this quote unquote meaning crisis. Look at the society as a whole, like this meta crisis, or even what you're saying, kind of the poly crisis, which is like all these different things all struggling at the same time.
Definitely.
That's what we're contending with, I think. And I find myself, sitting here looking for conversations about it. I mean, it's wild. I didn't quite realize that you were a Ukrainian refugee and a war refugee, and that I'm having a conversation today that's even possible amidst all of this. Because when that war broke out, and the American response to that was, the news and the flags and all these things. And
I have a funny story about that as well, because
what?
the next day, I just intercede a bit. The next day, I woke up in the basement and I looked online, and all of the world, journals and newspapers had bloody Vlad starts the war, and because Vladimir is a probably too much to print. I don't know, and I thought, "Hey, that's terrible to my brand, so I need to."
Oh gosh, I didn't think about that. Or so, but yeah, so I wake up, and we're like, oh man, and we've been in this kind of collective until I think, well, probably even around till 2016, but there's still fumes of it where these big things would happen in culture, globally or locally. And we would all kind of get on one side of this thing or the other, or it was just this massive push. And, and really COVID broke that, just kind of broke that in half. But so it's very interesting though, thinking back to, how long ago was that now? Are we at 2 years?
2 years,
Yeah,
and
that's wild to think back to that. And I think
it's the event that ended COVID, by the way, in my personal experience.
oh, let's move on. Yeah, a new dramatic thing. But to say that here I am having a conversation with that, that would have, where I'm at, a very small rural town in Arkansas, it doesn't seem like that's just ever going to be a possibility in my life. And because of this YouTube, and because of the algorithms, and because of Twitter, and because of now StreamYard, like these interactions, all of a sudden it's very powerful. And all of a sudden I'm having a conversation with somebody that I never thought, and it's and it is based on some of these involuntary algorithms that take up our digital avatar or whatever they're building, and they say, well, you might be interested in this person.
Yes.
And then you start seeing their information, and then it's like, oh, well, yeah, and this there could be a good conversation here. So it's a very weird, like you said, dance that we're involved in on that front as well.
Do you remember what you said from the, like, I jumped in on the chat and you said on Twitter, you DM'd me and you said, are you the same Vlad?
Yeah.
So just even the same question of, there's an opportunity for you to be different people in different places, but then you're kind of, I could have said no, right? And you
Yeah.
would have been confused. But then it's my choice to kind of unite those two identities and
Yeah,
say,
that's
I am the same person in different, you know,
I
basically
had
boxes.
I'm not doing this on my personal Facebook and Instagram. So this is kind of, there's like this bifurcation between Twitter and YouTube and Instagram and Facebook for me
LinkedIn
at
as well.
present. What's that?
LinkedIn too, like that
Yeah, that's
professional. So
socials,
it's a very different persona or different even things you talk about. So on Twitter,
ethos. Yeah.
so definitely there's this separation of identities, and I think it's driven by the nature of these networks. So as I said, the harvesting itself. Even if you look at Twitter, right, one of the features of Twitter was ability to limit, right? That, what was it, 180 characters initially.
Hmm.
So that limitation, that product software limitation, and by the way, there's no practical reason to limit it. Maybe in terms of software and
Initially,
that database storage or
bandwidth. Yeah.
but at some point it became a feature, right? Maybe it was kind of organically happened,
Arbitrary. Yeah.
yes, but then it became a feature of the platform. So now, um, same with Facebook, right? There's a technology called GraphQL that Facebook had to invent basically to represent graph data. And uh, by the way, this background that you have, it is a graph, right? So you have nodes and you have edges, and it's a way to represent data structures. So this networks of friends, right, and friends having some shared friends and not shared friends, that maps onto technology as well, right?
Yes.
So there's a concept of object-oriented programming, which to me is fascinating because the way that came to be is it was based on a book by Christopher Alexander, who was an architect who directed buildings, and it's called Pattern Language.
Mm.
So the patterns that he described in order for architects to build buildings happen to apply to these digital concepts. And now you're able to, describe things like, it's classes, right? And classes create objects of certain types. So it's going to be a small program, software engineering lesson. So that way to construct software is called object-oriented programming. And the idea is you have instances and you have kind of abstract definitions. So you can have an abstract class called an animal, but then you will have a more detailed or specific class called a cat, for example, right? Same thing with a vehicle and a car and a bike, right? So the things that are similar in that is the amount of wheels. So for example, amount of wheels could be a property of a class, and it can be a property on an abstract class called vehicle. But then when it becomes more concrete, and it becomes and it becomes a
I don't know what
vehicle.
that is, by the way.
This is, by the way, this is built into Mac OS, so it's not in the system. You can do all kinds of gestures, and I believe the heart as well. Yeah.
Oh,
So it's not. We had complaints. I know.
mystery solved, because I've had that thumbs up on like 2 other videos, and
Yeah,
we were like, I didn't do it. I didn't do it.
I know. StreamYard had complaints from people.
Wait, let me just,
It is disabled. You can disable it on in the system
is it like a
settings.
secret thing that
It's in macOS, but um, we will go back to
yeah,
StreamYard
sorry.
soon because we had complaints. People said remove this, and we're just like, we didn't add anything. And by we, I need to also make a clarification. I don't work directly from StreamYard. I work for a company that has both StreamYard and this other project that we have. It's called Streamable, which is a video hosting. So you can save this and host your videos there. But we work very close to the StreamYard team, and it's a fantastic product, truly.
Yeah.
So tying it all up, the way that software is built is by having abstract definition and then concrete instances. And that is a pattern of truth that is both, it's kind of one of the more universal patterns of how to build anything, right? To have a abstraction and have incarnation, if you want to use that word as well. Something more concrete, more specifics, more detailed, more specialized. And all of the software, all of the hardware, everything is built that way, right? From the smallest logical gates that you can solder that then fit into larger, chips, and then that becomes a part on the motherboard, and then it becomes a piece of equipment, and then you put it in a data server, and then you breathe electricity into it, and it starts ticking, right? So the processor gets, it's not alive, but then with the current, it becomes alive. There is a clock in the processor, and then software is able to utilize that, arithmetic.
Man, you said breathe electricity into it.
That's what it is.
And we're talking about a silicon structure.
Yes.
So when I was taking anatomy and physiology, our professor mentioned there was the theory that there could be, because we're a carbon-based life form, you and I, that because of their molecular structure, there could theoretically, because they're so close together, like on the periodic table, there could maybe be a planet where possibly life forms developed that were silicon-based, whereas we developed as carbon-based life forms. And you think about the biblical story of God breathing life into this carbon-based life form, and for you to say, and then you breathe electricity into this silicon-based life form, and it creates a type of existence, was pretty intense way to put that, like how that connected for me to hear that. And I mean, that's where this whole a huge part of this conversation with artificial intelligence and what that means, and playing God, being God, that whole, I mean, we're right there on the cusp of that. There's kind of two streams I want to hit on, which is, you mentioned this nodal network graph that I have as a background. It really stuck out to me because I saw it on Canva. I don't know if you're familiar with that company, and I just grabbed it and made a branding logo and everything. But Bitcoin is what really got my brain thinking about decentralized networking. And so that's one stream. And then the other stream was with artificial intelligence. But so I'm going to head off on the Bitcoin stream. So with when I began to understand the difference between centralized and decentralized nodal networks, and how, the miners are just creating a decentralized network every time somebody just decides to do that. Versus, to the best of my understanding, say something like my bank, or something like, I'll just use Amazon, even though it probably won't completely make sense in the illustration, but say that most of their data is stored, say it was on 6 servers in different places, which it's probably way more than I'm just using this as or my bank's data is all, stationed on, say, 2 servers in 2 different states that they pay for, and everything's running off that. And that's highly centralized. And the attack point on that would be much easier to disrupt than something like this, where Bitcoin could technically run off of one computer in Antarctica if everything got blown, got EMP'd everywhere else. I think And that like completely blew my mind when I kind of understood that as a concept.
Well, I can give you a little bit of even another, maybe you've thought about it, but
Okay.
um,
But then that it also maps on relationally, and that these nodes that we're creating, that's kind of what I see this as also happening is obviously relational networking, but the fact that it can be done digitally now, I'm just now tapping into like the past 3 months in a real degree. Obviously, we've all done it on social media for years with your high school buddies and whatever,
yeah,
but this, everybody on this version of Christian Baxter YouTube and Twitter, basically everybody that's connected to this is nobody that I knew before 3 months ago. There's a few exceptions of that.
yeah. Well, in general, how I think distributed networks are emergent,
Yes.
whereas something centralized, it is placed by someone intentionally, right? So again, it becomes a way of, it's the directionality of this, right? Either it's top to bottom or bottom up. And decentralized networks are bottom up, whereas top to bottom, even though like the technology itself, right, Satoshi's paper was kind of the seed, but then that seed could have been planted on any computer in the world, right? The whole story of that, I I look into the lives of saints now, and to
Mm-hmm.
me, I think Satoshi most resembles Saint Nicholas because of this whole idea of charity and creating value, without and giving it freely to anyone, right? So I kind of view them as connected because again, we don't know who Satoshi is and how that whole thing came to be. um
And we were at St. Nicholas Cathedral down in Symbolic
yes,
World.
yes. So um like this aspect of charity, it's extremely important virtue in all of the religions, and especially in Christianity. And he or them, and we don't know, right, knew full well the implications of this technology way more than any of us did, right? Because ultimately, what has been solved by that paper is the three generals problem. It's a problem of, in my understanding, it's a game theoretic problem, right? Of
Trust.
how do you resolve trust in a system where no one
Yeah.
can be trusted, and the solution is in math and very, very, deep cryptographic proofs of these things. And there is idea of transparency because the data is there. It's just only very specific accounts or wallets can access, the value stored, or keys, right? Um, and keys, by the way, is also an extremely symbolic, you know, object. If you've seen the image of resurrection of Adam and Eve, in I don't know, probably you're not very familiar with Orthodox iconography, but there's an idea of all of the keys and all of the logs being broken at that event, right? So keys are, I think, it's a separate topic that we can spend a lot of time on. But this decentralized versus centralized is another pattern of reality, and I think it's more apparent in politics, because Soviet Union and Russia right now, it's way more centralized, right? It kind of harvests from all over the place, centralizes, and then if they are very generous, they can give a portion back, right? And that creates inefficiencies. Even if you design it as a software system, right, it takes time for that transaction to occur. Whereas I think Ukrainians had to think on their feet way more, even though again government is quite controlling, and the idea that the borders were locked on super quickly, that's a very centralized and very authoritative move.
Mm-hmm.
um, but the way that the society has handled this terrible event shows that this, again, I think it kind of proves my theory about fighting something centralized with something decentralized, something that's top down uh, with something that's bottom up.
That
And
became the theory that made so much sense to me. Was someone gave this example, I think it's pretty real, where say certain French colonies or old French colonies in Africa, as merchants are, they're making, they receive local fiat. And then, but these unstable countries with low trust in their banking institutions, anytime that these banks want to, they might lock up their assets or, debase the currency or whatever. And if they had this type of transactional value that was not centralized, but they both had a cell phone and some internet, they could say, well, in this, the bank's down today. Well, I'll trade you this pot, or I need a pot for my water, and I'll give you 0.0000 hash, whatever, sat. And they make a transaction, and there's nothing that anybody can do about that. And then there's the other part that you mentioned about the limiting principle. And I'll give an example to that. That's something, this is really abstractly connected, but it continues to inform you already mentioned the Twitter character count that actually was kind of important in a way. When I was at Symbolic World, I met a priest who I began a conversation with about some things going on here where I live. And he told me that he would pray for me through Lent. And he was a Western, he's Anglican. So that was back when that was happening. And that actually held so much more meaning for me than if someone had said, well, I'll pray for you.
Or text you. Oh.
Because of the limiting principle. It made me feel like because of that limiting principle, it increased the value of that prayer expectation because it felt more achievable. It felt more like he could be more intentional with that because he put a limiting principle on it. So I don't know how those exactly connect, but I just realized that there's something to that. It was very clear to me in an instant. Oh, wow. That felt much more meaningful.
Yeah, well, scarcity, right? Scarcity creates value. It's why Bitcoin has a limited cap. And in order for it to, now when Bitcoin reaches its, all of the coins have been minted, the only way to increase the value of the network is to pack more value into every single Bitcoin, right? There's this Austrian economics that I'm not particularly, smart to know in full detail, but it makes sense because now it fights inflation, in my understanding, right? And that creates some certainty in future, right? And it takes away control from these, Federal Reserves or whatever. I think one of the huge mistakes that U.S. has made is seizing Russian assets, that were rightfully Russian, right? But they have mishandled trust on a global geopolitical scale, and even though it may benefit short term, whoever, the only thing why the dollar is valuable is that trust that and now you see way more cooperation between Russia and China and that whole, that part of the world, which I don't think is good to the West. So trust is truly the only currency, right? That's what fiat is. It's not, and even fiat, even gold standard is based on the fact that we trust for some reason that gold is valuable, even though now I don't know how much jewelry you have or how much, gold still holds some production value, but way less than, I think, than aluminum or some other steel, for example, right, which are more common. But gold is not particularly good for making cups, making something that lasts, right?
Well,
And
trade handing coins and holding coins, physical coins,
oh, I
gets
love coins. I actually made
cumbersome.
I,
Ah,
I make coins as
you
well, but
mint coins? That's
I
cool.
mint my own coins. Yeah. So in general, I was when growing up and learning about computers and technology, and Google being established in the garage, I thought, oh, I wish I lived in those days.
Hmm.
And now I think we are living in the most exciting days, the most fast paced and quite horrifying. But
Yes.
it definitely is you know interesting to live through this. I remember my wife, on the day of the evening, she was reading Remark about World War, the Second World War and First World War, first, I believe. So, and I thought, be careful what you wish for, right? It seems like what we have, what we're living through right now, war or no war, it's something that books will be written about or YouTube channels will be established. I don't know how lasting that is, but it's definitely all of this technology, including StreamYard, including YouTube. It's revolutionary, even probably more so than the printing press, because now you don't need to read.
Yeah.
How crazy is that? You don't like
Well, that's,
spoken word is enough.
I'm here's what I came to the conclusion of kind of getting part of launching into this and being like, well, I didn't know I would be afforded the opportunity really to launch into a type of podcast. When I just was getting on to kind of express some things that had been inside of me for so long. And then there was like reaction and relationship and communication and interest. And I was like, oh, but one of the first videos I made was about how 3-hour conversations changed the world, talking about Joe Rogan basically and the like of long form podcast. And he sits at the top because he, whether he knew it or not, unlocked the gold that we had been missing for a long time, which was literally sitting down and talking to somebody, because no one feels like they have the time to do that. And in some ways, maybe we don't, but it's also hard to find people to talk about, like, say you get into this interest on YouTube and you spend 3 years learning about finance, or you spend 3 years learning about, philosophy. And it's like, well, I don't know who to talk to about this anymore because all the people in my community, they're interested in 10 other things, or you don't know. And it's hard to even know how to get that started. But you make one video, you stick it on YouTube, and somebody says, oh yeah, man, I was just listening to X, Y, and Z. And it's like, well, there's this thing called StreamYard. You want to get on there and have a conversation?
Yeah.
I mean, that's wild to that point. And so Joe Rogan, and even just this whole thing is like, how much am I learning just by listening to a Ukrainian refugee software engineer? A lot. And I don't know. And the other interesting thing that as I was putting together the intro for this one in particular, it kind of happened last time. The last conversation I put together, one like this, was a guy named Chamomile TV. His name's Jacob. I just released, or it's going out tomorrow. And he's also a software engineer. Spent time in Silicon Valley, and he's out of that now. And I was like getting all this information about them. I watched one of his podcasts, scrolled his Twitter, read his bio, and I was like, I already, like, that's all right here. And so even for you, I did even more of that, because you and I had even, I didn't catch that you were on that Grailyard thing till today.
Yeah.
And so, but I was like going down your Twitter, I read your bios. I followed the link to the Logoi dev. Okay, well, this is kind of interesting, and then I was like, oh, well, we could talk about this, and we could talk about this, and oh, look, there's that, and that kind of shocked me because I didn't, like you said, like you don't have a book, but you do have a digital. Your avatar. I'm doing what AI does, but on a different kind of level, and it's wild. I wanted to hit, and if you want to respond to that too, but there's also this other thing. I actually, from your Twitter, is one of the last things I saw was you posted Sam Altman, because we've kind of been on this tech thing, and we'll kind of close it on the AI thing. Is Sam Altman's first conversation with you posted, what's his name, Lex Friedman.
Lex Friedman, yeah.
And you kind of had this long review of it, and you kind of contrasted Lex between Elon Musk, and it was kind of interesting because you kind of made this point about this decentralized or this centralized network of GBT versus something that's less centralized. And I would say something like Twitter is kind of a decentralized network. Not the company, but the participants, and like any social network is. And so I think that you were kind of contrasting these, and he was, well, Elon Musk, he posts these memes, and Sam Altman seems like super serious, but then there's also something about him I just don't trust. But then I'm laughing with Elon Musk, and I'm not laughing with Sam Altman. And there's an interesting parallel there. I don't know. There was a couple of things. I'll just throw that out there kind of as we're kind of tying this thing up.
It seems in general, I think my understanding, they started this company, right, together, and they pulled the resources, but then their characters are very different. And I see Elon, again, I cannot explain how he does what he does. He's able to kind of, seems to me like he's in a manic state, but he's able to channel it extremely productively, and from
maybe
the
autistic, a type of autistic state too. I think he actually says that.
It's clear that his speed of thought exceeds yours or mind, right? In terms of what's going on in his mind. Yet he's able to kind of surf that chaos within. But he changed. I kind of liked him better when he was not posting memes every day and engaging into political debates. But his vision of this everything app, right, the X thing, that's what PayPal was before, and it started with payment. Now, I guarantee you, payments will become part of X, right? It depends on, again, trust. Who's in control of this? Now today is like he's doing this battle with Brazil, or I don't really know what's going on, but the idea that now this one particular person is able to gather so much power, and in case of Elon, I think it's emergent. That's what's surprising to me, is it seems like people are willingly giving it up. He's not authoritative in terms of, I'm taking it and you have to go along. If you don't want to, you can, don't use it. You don't, maybe I'm wrong, but in general, the perception of how he does business seems more aligned with this bottom-up approach. Whereas Altman, to me, even the idea that they're now with Microsoft, they're building like $100 billion computer, right? And to me, it means the way that GPT does computation is centralized. And I asked it, it's very interesting because you can have a conversation with it, and I go on walks and I talk to this thing. And it is centralized. It's a single instance, single node, right? Maybe the nature of how the data is distributed, but the way that it computes seems very single. Now, I don't know if distributed AI is possible or if it's going to be able to achieve the same type of performance that a centralized thing of the same magnitude can. I don't know the technology well enough, but it's definitely the distributed one will be more resistant to hostile takeover. Depends on who has the keys. Uh, if he's going to have some type of open blockchain for the payments there, or a way to validate your identity, but that X will become a bank. It will become something akin to WeChat, I think, something that's very similar to this Chinese
Right.
communication platform.
Everything app. Yeah.
Everything app, that's what it means, right? And for everything, it needs a way to verify your identity. It needs to, and that blue check mark, and a way to subscribe to have your identity verified. It's stirred a lot of controversy, but that was the first thing that he implemented, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that's coincidence or random. It is by design. So the next thing will be payments, the community nodes. So I see it as a system that is increasingly more open. Even Grok, their AI, they're open sourcing
Yeah. I saw
pieces of
that.
it,
Yeah.
and I think that's a correct trend. That's why I'm still around on Twitter, because I'm
Mhm.
super surprised and interesting how it develops as a product, as a thing. It's not yet clear what it is. YouTube is, I think, pretty clear what it is already. StreamYard is unique
What
because
is YouTube? Tell me what it is.
so YouTube is kind of this Alexandrian library, right?
Yes.
Of um, censored thought, and by censored I don't mean government, which in some cases yes, but it also by editing, right? So we have a 1 hour conversation right now, and on YouTube you may not choose to put the entire thing, right? You can edit it, make it more digestible, make more sense. uh, there are things that I can say right now that will require filtering, or maybe I disclose something that I shouldn't have. StreamYard is way more fluid and open to risk, I think, because you're streaming it to YouTube, and in theory, right, you can have 1 million people connect right now and listen to us talk, and it's a live broadcast, right? Um, it's incredible, right? YouTube allows, but YouTube is a destination, whereas StreamYard is an input source, right? It's what you talk into,
Yeah.
and then it gets distributed. That's quite unique and amazing, right? And that it can function even, and you can have multiple people connect at the same time from all source, all pieces of the world.
It's been very stable too, my experience.
Yeah, they take a lot of pride to make it work in all kinds of situations, and mobile as well, right? So
Hmm.
you can have this on 3G, and it's
Yeah.
still going to attempt to downscale, compress the video, transmit as much. There's other AI tools that are kind of helping us work, because you can compress video on one end, transmit as little data as you can, and then
Wow.
upscale it on the other end. Same with audio, and it's mind-boggling that it works. Yet it does, and I have the keys. I have the source code of this thing. So, and it's completely incredible, right?
What
You,
are your thoughts as we kind of close in, as you see kind of this Paul Vanderklay corner? I guess, are you familiar with Paul?
I know his contact. We never spoke, so
Okay, but that this a lot of the people that are in that sphere are using StreamYard specifically because of its very easy access, and just, I mean, and that the input, it's very simple. It's incredibly simple. You can do a lot of fun things with it. I mean, it sounds like we're, promote, like I guess I can't put my little sponsor thing and people can give me some credit or whatever, but it's, it really is incredible, and what it's affording. And from your perspective, kind of as we kind of close this thing down, what do you think, what do you see, and what do you see the future of its use?
So I know for a fact that podcasting, so turning this, making it so that you push a single button and this becomes a podcast that is hosted on all of the platforms, is something that I think is valuable.
Mm-hmm.
So our target audience is the creators, are you, right? Someone who wants to build an audience and who wants to engage in conversation. So it's very dialogue based, and the quality of that dialogue is important. And the design approach is that we want the technology to disappear, basically, right? It's just you and your companion, right, or group that you're speaking to. Everything that else that's around you, it's there if you need it, but it's not there if to kind of jump at you or distract you, or it's meant to be, as again, as helpful
Transparent. Yeah.
as helpful as you can be. And I think it's quite, what I like about it is it's ethical. There are no ads. It's very upfront. You pay what you get. You get what you pay for, and it brings value, right? Because I think it makes your life, my life, much easier. You just send the link, and in a second you're good to go.
Yeah. That's cool.
The future, I think it's definitely a piece of it. And again, I'm not part of the StreamYard product, as I said, so I don't know much about the plans, about what the specifics of it. But my understanding of the global vision is, we will not, unfortunately or fortunately, will not be able to avoid this AI hype, and all of the digital products will have to either learn how to use it in a way that it makes sense. And in our case, there are a couple of ways that I can see it grow. For example, again, growing these networks, or something that you suggested that Twitter kind of does, is, hey, this is a creator or a person that's interesting and they speak about the same topics that you do. Do you want to connect maybe, or talk to?
So a social element. A social element. Yeah.
Some type of discovery or social element to it, to again facilitate these conversations, facilitate that more people are using the product, because at the end of it, that's
a business. Yeah,
that's the business, right? But overall, I think whatever you have at this point is already, don't break it. I hope that they don't break it.
I agree.
So,
well, Vlad, man, thank you for your time today, for coming on and hearing your story, your journey from Ukraine and with your family and your son. It was a really, it's a humbling experience to get to hear you tell your story. And I enjoyed walking down the technological rabbit trails with you, and the theological ones and philosophical ones. And I hope that it makes sense for us to have another conversation again in the future. And so, everyone, you can look up Vlad on Twitter. He's got his Logoi Dev at Logoi Dev on there, and also his personal one. So check it out. Vlad, I'm going to hit this video bumper. We'll end this thing backstage. All right, man.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.